Chapter 70. The Sphinx. It should not have been omitted that previous to completely stripping the body of the Leviathan, he was beheaded. Now, the beheading of the sperm whale is a scientific and anatomical feat, upon which the experienced whale surgeon very much prides themselves, and not without reason. Consider that the whale has nothing that can properly be called a neck. On the contrary, where his head and body seem to join, there in that very place is the thickest part of him. Remember also that the surgeon must operate from above, some 8 or 10 feet intervening between him and his subject, and that subject almost hidden in a discolored, rolling, and oftentimes tumultuous and bursting sea. Bear in mind, too, that under these untoward circumstances he has to cut many feet deep in the flesh, and in that subterranean manner, without so much as getting one single peep into the ever-contracting gash thus made. He must skillfully steer clear of all adjacent interdicted parts, and exactly divine the spine at the critical point hard by its insertion into the skull. Do not marvel, then, at Stubbs' boast that he demanded but 10 minutes to behead a sperm whale. When first severed, the head is dropped astern and held there by a cable till the body is stripped. That done, if it belong to a small whale, it is hoisted on deck to be deliberately disposed of. But with a full-grown Leviathan this is impossible, for a sperm whale's head embraces nearly 1/3 of its entire bulk, and completely to suspend such a burden as that even by the immense tackles of a whaler, this were a vain thing to attempt weighing a Dutch barn in jeweler's scales. The Pequod's whale being decapitated and body stripped, the head was hoisted against the ship's side about 1/2 way out of the sea, so that it might yet in a great part be buoyed up by its native element, and there, with the strained craft steeply leaning over it by reason of the enormous downward drag from the lower masthead, and every yard arm on that side projecting like a crane over the waves, there that blood-dripping head hung to the Pequod's waist like a giant Holofernes from the girdle of Judith. When this last task was accomplished, it was noon, and the seamen went below to their dinner. Silence reigned over the before tumultuous but now deserted deck. An intense copper calm, like a universal yellow lotus, was more and more unfolding its noiseless, measureless leaves upon the sea. A short space elapsed, and up to the noiselessness came Ahab alone from his cabin. Taking a few turns on the quarter-deck, he paused to gaze over the side. Then slowly getting into the main chains, he took Stubbs' long spade, still remaining there after the whale's decapitation, and striking it into the lowest part of the half-suspended mast, placed its other end crutchwise under one arm, and stood leaning over with eyes attentively fixed on this head. It was a black and hooded head, and hanging there in the midst of so intense a calm, it seemed the Sphinx's in the desert. "Speak, thou vast and venerable head," muttered Ahab, which, though ungarnished with a beard, yet here and there lookest hoary with mosses. "Speak, mighty head, and tell us the secret thing that is in thee. Of all divers thou hast dived the deepest. That head upon which the upper sun now gleams has moved amid this world's foundations, where unrecorded names and navies rust, and untold hopes and anchors rot, where in her murderous hold this frigate earth is ballasted with the bones of millions of the drowned. There in that awful water land, there was thy most familiar home. Thou hast been where bell or diver never went. Thou hast slept by many a sailor's side, where sleepless mothers would give their lives to lay them down. Thou saw'st the locked lovers when leaping from their flaming ship, heart to heart they sank beneath the exulting wave, true to each other when heaven seemed false to them. Thou saw'st the murdered mate when tossed by pirates from the midnight deck, for hours he fell into the deeper midnight of the insatiate maw, and his murderers still sailed on unharmed, while swift lightning shivered the neighboring ship that would have borne a righteous husband to outstretched longing arms. O head, thou hast seen enough to split the planets and make an infidel of Abraham, and not one syllable is thine." "Sail ho!" cried a triumphant voice from the mainmast head. "Aye, well, now that's cheering," cried Ahab, suddenly erecting himself, while the whole thunderous cloud swept aside from his bow. That lively cry upon this deadly calm might almost convert a better man. Wear away. 3 points on the starboard bow, sir, and bringing her down her breeze to us. Better and better, man. Well, now, St. Paul would come along that way, and to my breezelessness bring his breeze. O nature and O soul of man, how far from beyond all utterance are your linked analogies. Not the smallest atom stirs or lives on in matter, but is cunning duplicate in mind. This is the end of chapter 70. Now, I mentioned before in the chapter of the funeral how the headless body floated away, but I don't recall hearing about it being decapitated before. So here we have the whale being decapitated, which takes place kind of before the previous chapter. But so the whale's decapitated, and then they're going to process the head of the whale after they've stripped off the blubber. And the sperm whale it's kind of like the head that you want, because the head of the sperm whale is full of this stuff called spermaceti, which is very good for making into whale oil. So, and the whole head of the whale is like full of it. It's the melon at the front and the big bulk of it, and I've mentioned that before. Now, talks about this as being the head of the Sphinx. So the Sphinx is a giant statue in Egypt. I mean, this thing is just absolutely huge. It's like it's not as big as the Great Pyramids are, but it's on the same sort of scale, so it fits in with them. I mean, it's like 50 feet high, and it's just this big rocks thing of a lion with a man's face. So you have the lion with the man's face, and there's ancient stories of the Sphinx in Greek mythology. One of the people who encountered the Sphinx was Oedipus, and was asked a question: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs during the day, and 3 legs at night? And the answer is man, because man crawls when he's just born, so baby crawls. 2 legs when he walks upright, and 3 as an old man, where he walks with a cane. So that was Oedipus. That was the riddle of Oedipus. But the Sphinx is known for not speaking, and so that's the whole mythos around the Sphinx is generally not speaking. And the riddle, I think, was actually printed out for Oedipus, but the whole mythos of the Sphinx is it not speaking. So here you have Ahab addressing the head of the whale, kind of like Hamlet, alas poor Yorick. Yorick. Hamlet is a Shakespearean tragedy. There's a lot of interesting things in there. But there's one scene where Hamlet is coming home to Denmark, and he sees a gravedigger digging a grave. And there's a whole bunch of terrible puns in there. And at one point, the gravedigger digs up an old head and hands it to Hamlet. And Hamlet's like, who owned this head? And it was Yorick. And Yorick was a jester. And so Hamlet knew it, and he held up the head. It was like, oh, poor Yorick. And so he's talking to the head, kind of like Ahab is talking to the head of the whale. Why he went with the Sphinx in Egypt, I guess probably because the size of the whale's head is like the size of the Sphinx's head. Give you a sense of the scale of things. So you have Ahab talking to the skull of the Sphinx, skull of the whale, like a Sphinx, and saying, tell me your secrets. You know all the bodies under the ocean. And Ahab is, once again, thinking about all of the dead people, the sailors washed overboard, the ships that sank, the lovers who leaped from the burning ship, people murdered by pirates. And Ahab is like, tell me the secret. You know where the bones are. You've dove deeper than anyone else. Though admittedly, if I had just been killed and my ghost were there being interrogated, I would not want to answer questions. So anyway, so Ahab is talking to the decapitated whale, and he sees another ship. So we're going to have another ship encounter on the next chapter. Cool.